Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Innovation Blueprint podcast. I'm your host, Paula Shishkovsky, and today we have a very interesting guest with us, Avishek Biswas. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes.
Perfect. Avishek is from Australia, so he's in the morning time zone. I'm out here in the evening, but we really appreciate him joining. It's crazy thinking that for him it's a day ahead, and for me it's still a day behind. Time works in weird ways. But Avishek works for Vopak. Vopak is the world's leading independent tank storage company provider. They rely a lot on safety, and that's actually Avishek's specialty, safety and compliance. Health and safety and compliance. So I will let Avishek maybe tell us a little bit about his journey into the energy space and how his background in health and safety has brought him here.
No, thanks, Paula. Glad to be here. Look, I think my journey to where I am today, it started from a little bit of a technical background lens. So I did a engineering degree in chemical engineering, and then later in environmental engineering, and started my career, you can say, in Singapore, actually, in a shipbuilding yard. So when I was working in the projects, I think that's when probably health and safety side of the business has kind of hit me, and I try to understand how that affects the overall delivery of project. You have to make sure that people are safe when you're delivering a project, because that kind of delays the whole process if someone's got an injury. So from there on, I kind of built my career, moved into Australia, and then finally landed here. Um, in Vopak, though, I think we are now approaching health and safety a bit differently. So Vopak, as you mentioned, is the largest independent tank storage in the world. We in Australia specifically, we deal with fuel, so flammable and combustible liquids, which means inherently it's a high risk business. Health, safety, compliance is core to the business. So we are kind of thinking about it in a way that how can we build resilience to the business? How can we build the risk management sense within the business? And I'm building health and safety side is as a core business function. Yeah, so that's where we are kind of now. So more working in the cultural side of the things, also looking at new strategies and new innovation in the health and safety area. Yeah, so that's where we are right now.
Okay, very interesting. And so, as you know, Abhishek, this is the innovation blueprint. So we talk a lot about innovation and uh, emerging technologies and how that's kind of affecting the different industries. And so, you work in a very manufacturing heavy, operations heavy business. But I'm assuming you guys are utilizing a lot of new technologies to help us from this health and safety aspect as well. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those?
Yeah, exactly. I think, look, it's an evolving area right now, right? I mean, every day you've got a new technology coming in. So we are trying to kind of automate our processes. So a lot of this, so I'll give you a specific example. So let's say we've got a permit to work process. So previously we had this process as very manual, so paper-based system. Now what you're trying to do, we're trying to make it an online-based system where you can actually have real-time data of the hazards of that specific task. Now, what it does, it gives you very good idea of what activities is happening on site at any given point, what hazards are currently, affecting you in the business at that specific time. So that lets the management to focus on high risk activities, whereas previously it was a manual activity, right? So these are small changes that's really really making changes how we work. We are also working on a different project on minimizing one of our biggest risks, which is the spill. So when we have a product fall in the ground, that's what we call a product spill. So in our business, in our world of the type of business that we do, we cannot have products going to ground. A product has a specific space, which is the storage tanks or pipelines, but they can't be in the ground. So we had few incidents previously where product went into ground for different reasons. Now we are working with some AI solutions, some reputable companies, to find out how can we kind of restructure our processes and find out the issues before it happens. So that's an interesting project that we are working on now as well. So yeah, I think overall, it's really affecting of how we do, and in a positive way.
Okay, very interesting. And so there's kind of two different layers to it. So I'm assuming you probably use sensors, right, to detect some of these leakages, or you call it steel, right? When it goes into the floor.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's a spill. So it's a
spill. Yeah,
spill. So
yeah,
yeah, so
spill.
it's a product loss. Let's say it's a product loss. So we obviously, as I mentioned, we deal with flammable and combustible liquids. When it goes to ground, we say it's a loss, right? And we don't want that product going to ground because it creates different hazards. It creates a fire risk. It creates an exposure to human. It creates an environmental risk, and at the end of the day, it creates a business risk because you're losing the product, you're delaying the whole process. Yeah, so you're creating that risk. So yes.
So you're using the sensors to detect any spills or any other functionality and data, and then you're storing this data. I'm assuming on the cloud or on prem,
Mhm.
and then afterwards you're also adding an AI functionality on top of the data to infer the results. At the end of the day, how do you see those results? Is there a dashboard? Like, what's the
Mm.
visualization? Because back in the days, you
Mm.
probably would have to have somebody do language to SQL, or
Yeah,
like SQL coding
yeah.
to the data out of the data sets. How are you dealing with it now?
Data is a double-edged sword, right? I mean, you can have a lot of data, you can have less data. So we are focusing on meaningful data now in Vopak. So we gather data from all different sources. So if you talk about incidents, or the product losses that I'm talking about, so incidents, we gather data from our assets. As you mentioned, the sensors and all this, we gather data from there. We gather data from, from the maintenance works that we do. So a lot of data. Now, what we are doing now is we are integrating those data, as you mentioned, in a dashboard. But previously, we used to have a spreadsheet.
Mm,
So people would have to manually put the data from somewhere and add into spreadsheet, and someone else needs to have a look. So you would probably spend hours collating those data. What's happening in the last 6-12 months, at least within Vopak, we are automating that process. So if we are doing something, if we've got a on site where it's an automated sensor, the data directly comes to a system, and then it provides us a snapshot in a dashboard. So, for example, the permit to work system that I mentioned previously, it was a manual process, right? So we had to manually look at the permit, input the data into a spreadsheet. Someone had to look at the spreadsheet. Now we've got a portal where it's done through online. That means all the data, I can get a summary now. So I can, any point of time, even I'm at home, I can just log into the system and I can say, okay, how many permits, which high risk activity is happening. Whereas previously I had to make maybe 5 phone calls. I had to maybe go into a spreadsheet to find that
yeah.
information. So it's definitely positively affecting us. One thing that's really helping us is the thought process of barriers. So in our industry, so high risk industry, we talk about when a barrier fail, an incident can happen. Yeah. So uh, this data, it's giving us the ability to predict when the next barrier can fail. So 3 months down the track, 6 months down the track, we can see the historical trend and look at, okay, this barrier might fail, so let's focus on that more. We have a specific example actually on this as well. So last year we had number of issues with our contractors, and we had a simple barrier that was not working, which is, we call it an observation round. We do it very well, but we find that it's not working well. So we kind of fine tuned a little bit, and we reinitiated that process, that barrier with our operators. This year, we saw, end of December, we saw, after this process change, we saw a 50% reduction of incidents with our contractors. So that's because we got the data, we looked at the data, we rehashed our processes, it led to a really tangible outcome. So that's how really data is helping us.
Yeah, so data is definitely helping you predict crises more and issues,
Yep.
as well as able to infer on changes that you're able to make in order to avoid these issues. Have you found what's the percentage, and this could be obviously a rough amount here,
Mm.
of accuracy that these predictive models are giving you on cases?
Yeah, so look, it depends also of what type of data you're looking at. Also, one thing that we say always is garbage in, garbage out,
Mm,
which means if the data that we are inputting, because obviously you have to input some data and stuff. So again, going back to the same example of permit to work, if someone's not inputting the data correctly, so for example, not actually identifying the right hazards, the output data will not give me the right information, right? So that's where I think sometimes accuracy depends a little bit. But in overall, I would say, with the prediction that we have, I would say almost 80% of our data are kind of pretty well. Now, also remember, it's a very niche industry
mhm.
that I'm currently working in. It's a we store fuel. We have to be almost accurate. I would say 100% of the time, because if we make a mistake, we're talking about major incidents, not only in our terminal, in our affecting the broader community here in Sydney and Darwin. We're talking about an environmental disaster, so we kind of have to be 100% right all the time. So in that scenario, we have quite accurate data, but again, sometimes you can see output probably not what you're expecting, and because of the probably not the best input of the data.
Yeah, and so actually that's quite interesting to talk about the input of data because a lot of companies struggle with having good data. What has been the culture behind Vopak? Probably you had to start years ago to input data correctly
Hmm.
as well, and ingrain that in the culture in order for you guys to start
Yes.
implementing these AI tools. Did you guys have
Yes.
a feeling that this was going to happen and therefore data was important? How did that happen that you guys were able to make your data so clean to start using these innovations?
Yeah, yeah, very excellent. It's an excellent question, Paula. I think um, so. I started with Vopak in 2023, and one of my first tasks in Vopak was to build a strategy in health, safety, environment, and compliance for the next 3 years. Now, when you build a strategy, you look at your historical data, obviously, right? So when I started to look at the data in the last 5 years, obviously COVID happened before in 2021. You would not have a lot of data around that time, but again, you would have a bit of a general sense. When I look at the data, you see the input of the data wasn't great, and that means what I'm looking at is probably not the right picture of what's happening on site. Yeah, and that doesn't help you. So when I was building the strategy, one of my key points is to make sure that we input the data correctly as much as possible. How can I do that? So we came up with a strategy of double checking the data in the first year.
Hmm.
Of whoever inputting, there will be a person that will double check. So I'll give you a specific example that we have implemented in that case. So one thing that we have to do is when we have an incident happens, regardless of whatever happens, we have to classify the incident so that when every 3 months, 6 months, a year later, we look at the incident trend and we come up with campaigns. Um, Now, what we have implemented is in the first 6 months, we want to identify who is inputting the data and what guidance are they getting from here. So, for example, if you're not using the right guidance note, you will not be classifying the right data. So we focused a lot on that first and developed a very clear guideline. Okay, if this happens, you input this data. If this happens, you input this data. So it's a manual task, but I think we started to see from 25, so 23, 24, we focused on that. 25 onwards, we see, okay, it's, as I said, 80% of our data is pretty correct. And we now have a very clear idea when a new person starts, what do we need to tell them? What guidance note do we need to provide them so that they know when something like this happens, what do they need to put? So it took a little while. I think it took almost 3 years to get here. But I think the key thing here is acknowledgement. We acknowledge that our data wasn't great.
Hmm.
We acknowledge that, and then we said, okay, as I mentioned, we've got thousands, millions of processes where you get the data. Where do you want to focus? We can't focus on everything. So we focused on our key safety barriers where it can fail and lead to an injury, lead to an incident. Okay, this data is important. These are the KPIs that we want to track. Focus on that, and then 3 years later, you've got the right data. And now I look at the data, I'm quite comfortable. Okay, this is the right picture on site, and what it means, I can predict next year what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic that you thought about this and made sure that this was of key importance even, I guess 2023, we were seeing kind of the start of AI, but we weren't implementing it in the way that we are now in terms of predictive models. And so, I mean, that's incredible. And the fact that data now is really as important as gold, or like has the same value as gold, is something that people say, which is true, because if you don't have clean cut data, it's what you said, garbage in, garbage out. And therefore, you can't implement these innovative tools. No matter how beautiful your dashboards look and how well customized they are, they're not going to provide you the right information if the information in it is not correct. And so you have been very impactful in, I'm assuming, implementing all the new technologies from a health and safety perspective for Vopak. You seem very passionate about it, and you started off with the data aspect. How did you get into implementing the AI and starting to use it? And how were people scared? What was kind of the general feeling of the company when you guys started implementing these tools?
Yeah. Again, very interesting question. I think it's probably we're talking a lot about AI nowadays. So every I think even in safety conference that I would attend, I think there will be always a section on AI, so you can see how people are affected with AI. So I think within Vopak, as I mentioned before, I think with the type of industry we're in, we are quite automated in terms of it. Well, in different ways. Sometimes it's semi-automated, sometimes quite automated, sometimes probably a little bit manual task. But I think in the last 3-4 years, we have embraced AI pretty well. So when I say AI, I'm talking about some general tools that is already available in publicly, right? You think about Gemini, you think about Notebook LM, you think about Gem, those type of things. ChatGPT is another one which is outside of the business. So those type of things have already come in to our day-to-day life, to our professional life. So I think what I'm seeing now is how can we make ourselves more efficient, right? So previously, even with a dashboard, even with the data, it would have taken me to kind of see through those data and find out the real data in, let's say, a full day, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's happening now, you upload that, you give a little bit of prompt, and you say, okay, this is what I exactly need. It will give you in 10 minutes, right? So I think that's a massive change of how we work, right? I mean, you think about it, it takes a bit of time for people to grasp that. But actually, when I'm doing it on a day in, day out, because we are using AI quite on a daily. I mean, we always have a tab open. Look, I'm talking about very basic AI, obviously, right? Not the, but even on a day-to-day life, we will always have a tab open where we'll be asking this, we'll be uploading this document, and gathering the information, where it would take maybe 2 hours to find that information. So I think it's more on efficiency, Paula. Right now, that's AI affecting us. Now, different department within the business has approached it a bit differently. I think in our department, I have really pushed that AI has to be part of your role. If you are only doing a transactional role, in 2 years, your role will be replaced.
Right.
So we need to embrace AI and make it like a support worker for us. Yeah, if we don't embrace AI is going to take our job in 2 years. So I think that's what I'm really pushing hard, because sometimes safety can become a compliance focused, but AI can do that. AI can read a regulation by itself and tell us what's needed. AI can look at the data that we have, read the regulation, and tell us, okay, yes, you are compliant or not compliant. You don't need a safety person for that. So where do we bring that value and say, okay, yes, you've got AI, but you need a human you need a human to. I think that's what I see the next stage of evolution of, at least in my field. Yeah.
And from that question, where do you think the humans come in?
Yeah, I think. Look, yes, that's a very interesting question, right? Because I think we spend a lot of time, at least in at my level, we start to think about what's AI going to do in the next 5 years, right? And I think even when I speak to a lot of other safety person, they start thinking, oh, AI is going to take my job. So I attended a safety show last year where it automatically identifies a hazard let's say a forklift, when it's operating within a zone or outside an exclusion zone, it will automatically identify a person if it goes within that zone. Now, those type of things, previously you need a policeman, like a safety person, yeah. But now AI is doing that, and I'm sure in the next 2-3 years, 5 years, this is going to even improve further, where it means you don't need a person to identify those hazards. What
Mm-hmm.
AI can't do is the psychological safety. So AI can't identify what a person was thinking,
Yeah.
right? So we always think about there is a human that when an incident happens, we identify if there's a system failure, there is a human failure, and so we wouldn't know if there was a cultural issue that affected the incident, affected the person to talk about. We don't know if there's a personal issue happening with that person that affected to the decision making process. You need that human touch to drive that psychological safety. You need the human touch to sift through those data anyway with AI to drive to those campaigns, right? So you still need that human person. I think psychological safety is going to be massive in the next 3-5 years, if it's not already massive in different parts of the world. So I see our role going to that. Plus another piece where we go is ESG. I think which is environment, social, and governance,
Okay.
the
Yeah.
sustainability side of the things. Um, I see HSE moving to more into psychological safety, enterprise risk, ESG, because your day-to-day transactional role will be taken over by AI. So you need to move on to business enterprise risk so that you can still show your value to business, right? Otherwise, you're absolutely right. I think the next 2-3 years, we see a risk.
Yeah, because kind of like the way you described the process, you no longer need those two researchers to go and figure out the data for you and then come back to you to get the file. You don't need to ask your secretary to go find the file for you because you just find it yourself, or your intern, you just find it yourself on ChatGPT and or not
Yeah.
ChatGPT or whatever, whichever AI tool you're
Yes.
using. So it does make things a lot faster, and the idea of it being a lot faster must be huge for a security and from the health and safety perspective, because it's milliseconds and seconds when these issues arise. And so in these seconds that you're now able to work faster, have you felt like a wow, thank God I caught this early because of AI? Like think like this would have taken me much longer if it was done the old way. Like was there ever like a specific moment where you were like, this is such a sigh of relief that it was so much faster?
Yes. Yeah, without a doubt. Look, I've got a very young family, which means I have to really juggle with my professional life and personal life. And sometimes you do things in 10 minutes that because I've been in say health and safety for the last 14 years, right? So I've done a few things multiple times, and I've done manually as well in previous roles, and now I'm doing it in with AI. So a specific example was where I was developing a plan for this year for my department, and previously that plan would take me maybe a full week, because you would go through everything in the last year, what happened, the performance that we have, that all of my team members and everything, and also how the business has performed globally, what the industry is thinking. All now, what do? You put those data in AI, in a whatever AI tool that business is using. You provide some prompts of what you're exactly after. You provide some guidance note, and then you say, okay, give me the output. You get the output, and then you just refine it with some prompts again, and finally come into a presentation. I think some AI tools can now also develop presentations for you. So what would have taken a week for me, it will take maybe a day now. Now what it does, it creates a opportunity, and I think this is late last year, early this year, that was a wow moment for me, because I think now I'm learning more with AI as well, because I can ask very targeted questions, and it also giving me opportunity to balance my uh, you know uh, my professional life and personal life, because you're getting more time, you're focusing more on the important stuff at work, rather than just focusing on the admin things that take so much time. And then at the same time, you can work efficiently, meaning you can give your time to your kids. So actually it's really helping us. And then and these are the times where I'm thinking, yes, thank God I got it earlier. I mean, I think about if this was 10 years later, my kids would have been older. and then then you would lose these moments, right? So yeah, I think overall I would say AI is helping in both ways. So not only professionally, even in our personal life.
So we've touched upon a lot of the positives of using AI and all these innovative technologies, but have you encountered any complexities with using them?
Yeah, I think a couple. I think the most critical one at this point is probably the cybersecurity risk of using the data, using the AI, because I think AI has opened a new world, and everyone is connected right now. So when you're uploading a data into AI tool, sometimes it is publicly available, right? I think we know that there's an open AI softwares and all those type of things. So definitely, I think the risk has increased with AI. So the companies are putting a lot of effort. I know Vopak does put a lot of effort, but still we see incidents in a couple of countries. Even in Australia, luckily we haven't had any incident within Vopak, but we see that becomes a high risk. So I think the more developed AI becomes, the higher the risk would be for cybersecurity side of the things, and also also in terms of data theft, right? So that's definitely a big one. The second one is around, I think, the intergenerational workforce that we have within the business, and Australia specifically as well. So what I mean by that, in some generation, they would embrace AI very easily. It's just second nature. They just, in some other generation, it will be a slightly difficult for them to embrace it. Now, what it does, it creates a friction between the two groups. I think the group that uses AI thinks that the other group is a performance issue, um, whereas the other group is not a performance issue at all. They are working at their highest level, but it's more of embracing it, the cultural side of the things. I think the resistance to change side of the things. So I see that definitely is will be creating a little bit more friction if both in a generation or all the generations do not embrace AI. So yes, I think yeah, these are few complexities that I'm seeing within Vopak and overall in the world right now.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely interesting that you touched on cybersecurity here because that is a huge risk, and it's been a topic of conversation in general with cyber warfare, cyber attacks, and so it is
Hmm.
important to make sure that your technology is audited correctly. It's actually written by real developers and sometimes not AI itself because that's also a huge security risks from a custom software development perspective, and then also having the right cybersecurity teams now for these large organizations that are dealing with sensitive data. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. And then I guess my final question here, Avishek, um, tell me, how do you feel about the future of the business of the world with all of this new innovation?
I'm a very optimistic person. I think I mentioned about the scariness of AI a little bit, but I want to be optimistic. I think what I think maybe 100 years later AI will take over us, but let's not go there. So if I think about the next 10, 15 years, I see a positive change. So even within Vopak, if you think about it, we are a 400 years old business, right? And our main business is product storage, and it's a lot of these are fossil fuels. So I'm talking about petrol, diesel, those type of fuels we store. But you see, with the change in the world, we are going into sustainable energy more, right? I think in Vopak, in one of the terminal in maybe US, where they are focusing on batteries, right? So we see that move, we see that shift to sustainable energy. So that really excites me. So as an environmental engineer as well, that it excites me that Vopak is moving away from fossil fuel in some. Look, I think even if it's net zero 2050, even if fossil fuel will be here until then. So I
Yeah.
see still that transition very slow, but I think it's very interesting to see that Vopak move from fossil fuel in some areas quickly. So that's very exciting. That's the Vopak side of the business. From HSE perspective, I see our next generation of HSE professional will be doing totally different what I had done 10 years ago, right? That's really exciting. So so previously we were, I think, on the line. So it's more like we were becoming more of a policeman. We are doing more of compliance checks. We're doing more auditing. but AI will be doing that in 10 years. I see we become more of a risk manager. So it's not only about health and safety risk, it's about also our critical business risk. So we have become a crisis expert. We become a sustainability expert in the business. We talk in the language, in the commercial language, in 10, 15 years. And that's where I see the next evolution of HSE, which really excites me because I love those type of things, right? So I think, yes, it's very positive, Paula, the next 10 years, I would say.
Yeah, I love this. I love ending these conversations on a positive note. So I really appreciate everything that I learned today, Abhishek, and I'm sure our listeners will as well. So where can we find you? Can we find you on LinkedIn, socials? Where's the best way to connect with you, Abhishek?
LinkedIn, I think that's probably the main social media in terms of professional side of the things. So yes, I'm active in LinkedIn. You can reach out to me in LinkedIn.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much and hope to see you around soon.
Thank you so much, Paula. Thanks to be here.